This is Clipstone Old Quarter, as many of you regular viewers to this channel will know. It's been a few weeks since I last came here to record glowworms, and that was towards the end of June. And the season is well and truly over now. It's a very short season. But the reason for my visit today is to have a wander around the site to see how it's been affected by both this very dry summer that we've had and the hot temperatures, but also to see the effects of the restoration work which took place earlier in the year here. It was restoration work that was badly needed, and there's still more to come, but there's progress being made. The effects of the restoration work in each of sections A, B, C and D going up the hill there is variable. It varies from section to section. It's probably been less effective in section A, but the work that has been done in section A is still vital. Section B and C and D are probably the three best areas, and out of those three I would say section B is probably the area that at the moment is most like it used to be years ago. The darker green areas that you can see running up the grass strip are bracken, and bracken's fast becoming the big problem because the lack of maintenance or annual maintenance and cutting of the grass here over the last 5-6 years has meant that bracken has been able to spread through the grass strip from the very back here. It's come right through in many parts now and is bordering the path that I'm stood on the edge of. It's going to be a big and continuous problem. Now I moved up into about halfway point up section C, and I'm looking down section C. Running up the hill there is section B, which ultimately goes into section A. This section here was restored quite well, especially this lower section of section A, because it is predominantly all grass, which it always used to be. There's that one patch of bracken there, but behind me it's a different picture because there's a lot more bracken now, and it's quite like this, large areas of bracken all the way up this top half of section C and then up section D. The very top sort of quarter of section D is particularly badly affected. If you can hear a high-pitched buzzing just behind me here, it's a Russell's bush cricket. I can hear them, but most people can't, but I know it may well be discernible on the video. But I'm quite surprised to find this. And when I came here and walked up onto the grass strip, I was surprised to see that the grass was even green, because I didn't think it would be with all the heat and the dry weather that we've had for the last few weeks and months. I thought this would be scorched to a cinder. The edges of the path which runs up alongside each of the 4 sections here is, to all intents and purposes, it looks as though it's been weed killed, but it hasn't. It's just the effect of the heat. Thankfully, the knotweeds are still flowering and providing plenty of nectar for the hundreds of drone bumblebees that are flying around here. But it's nice to see this area of section C. It's just tucked in between areas of bracken. But this is exactly how section C, the whole of section C, used to be. And I'm surprised to see that it's even green. But some plants have struggled. Some broad-leaved plants that are growing in here, and the heath bedstraw and the likes, they do seem to have struggled. It's a shame the bracken didn't, but even in full sun and 30 odd degrees, bracken will still rampage through the habitat here. Well, this is the bottom of section D. Just on the left of the screen was where female 001 started the season off. And she glowed for about 5 consecutive nights, if memory serves me right, appearing on May the 17th, which was the second earliest glowworm here, and it was the earliest first reported glowworm in the UK this year, not surprisingly. But after that, it's been an unbelievably poor year. Very hard to describe the full total before I packed up. Coming up on a night time was 120 females, and that I believe was by June the 29th, and the season appeared to be almost over by then. I must admit I had lost a lot of the enthusiasm for coming up night after night and only seeing a handful of glowworms. There's only 2, maybe 3 occasions when double figures were reached, but otherwise it was low counts each night. But there appeared to be good numbers of males, but in the grass strip here it was an incredibly poor season. Most of the females appeared in the grass strip, and there weren't many. We're in the third quarter of section D, further up the hill in front. Female 1, which I had here just left underneath the camera, was the only female that I can recollect in this, certainly the bottom third of section D. There was only 2 or 3 in sections C, B and A. It really was a disastrous year, and without a doubt the effects of scrub encroachment and shading of the site, and bramble encroachment and bracken had left its toll on the glowworm population here. And the last thing we really wanted was this very dry summer. Such a dry summer and period of hot weather that we've had is going to make life extremely difficult for the glowworm here, and I really fear that next year could be even worse. Well, it seems like many months since I used to have to plough my way through this lot. Got to the stage where each night I would come up with a stick, and I had to sort of thrash my way through this, through the continually growing bracken. That's the only reason why there is slight hints of a pathway through this lot. The only way you can deal with this, really, you could do with somebody up here with a strimmer in the spring. Once the bracken has got to about 1 foot tall, trim it off. Might only take an hour or so. Do that several times. Problem is, when bracken's like this, you can't mow it. Not in the traditional method either. And I wouldn't ever like to see the use of azulux here as a bracken control. That really would spell the death knell for glowworms. They don't react very well to chemicals. But there again, neither does anything. Especially me. I'm going to see if I can try and take you through this. It'll be a bumpy ride, but it'll be the only way you get a real idea. Whoops. Obviously, I have to come down the other way through this, but if I hadn't cleared this path, we wouldn't be able to do this. And the interesting thing is, that on this narrow strip that I have, or did, chop down, there's not been a deal of regrowth. That is something promising. Here on the left, the bracken is 6 foot tall, and we're still not through it, but at least you get an idea of the problem. Consequently, because of all the bracken, there's been very little in the way of grass rejuvenation underneath it. We're still not at the top yet. Before I set off back down the hill, down sections J, K and O, and then briefly nip along L and M, it's worth mentioning along this top track here, this is an area that we used to cover years ago nightly, but packed it up when the surveying route became too much for Adidas myself. At the time when we packed it up, we were getting fewer and fewer glowworms along this stretch. The canopy had become closed, but some thinning out of the trees, especially along the edge of the path here, has enabled a bit of a strip of sky visible now. And it was quite pleasing that a number of glowworms were reported along here during 2022. Indeed, on one quiet survey towards the end of June, I did come along here myself, and I went right to the very far end towards where you turn down towards Blackpool. Now I was surprised at the number of glowworms there were. There was a pair mating on the path just a few yards from where I stood now, but right the way further down, I think there was about 5 female glowworms that I found. And so it's quite pleasing that glowworms have maintained a population up here in which was always the most shaded spot. This section, because it was shaded, also produced the last glowworms. These were the last survey sections to become sort of active, as we used to refer to it, at the end of the glowworm season. We knew that once glowworms were along here, the season was on the wane. So, I'm on the wane now, down section J, and we'll have a look down there, down J and K. Well, surprisingly, the bracken has struggled, especially either side of this top part of section J. About 40% of the bracken is probably affected here. Can't remember seeing this before, but it's obviously due to the scorching temperatures. Probably more burnt directly because of the sun and the strength of the sun, rather than the path or the surrounding soil being particularly dry. Because, to be honest, the sides of this track here are pretty much how I'd expect them to be this time of year. It looks quite normal. It's very different in section J to the top of section D. How that's been affected on the sides of the track by the sun and the heat. It's had less effect here. Well, as it's getting considerably more breezy by the hour, it's time to head home. I'm not going to bother going along sections L and M because it's pretty much like what you can see. This bottom section obviously suffered worse with the heat, because it's the hottest part of the site, so all the plants here in the centre of the track and very much along the edges of the track all the way up to the black pool are pretty much brown now. Overall, it was a very poor season for glowworms here, and a very worrying season as well. It's a shame that we have had such a dry year. Hopefully next year it'll even itself out a bit and we'll have a bit more rain, or even some rain. That'll be quite nice. Glowworms and glowworm larvae and glowworm eggs will have suffered greatly in the strong heat and temperatures that we've had. They soon suffer desiccation through lack of moisture, and there hasn't been any moisture for a long time. In fact, it's quite possible that in some areas all of the eggs laid by the females, unless they were laid deep in ground well off the track, which might have survived, but I think the majority of the eggs and young larvae resulting from those eggs will have been lost. Could put the return or hoped for return of the glowworm back at least 2 years, but you never know. I mean, some larvae would have survived reasonably okay, though it was tucked away, but it's just that lack of rain this year is worrying. So that leaves us next year with more work to do to try and determine how this summer